This next question comes from Unpopular Opinion, and he asks, my question is, why has feminism become something that people enjoy trashing in a recreation in a
Recreational way.
recreational way? I've got all Elmer Fudd. I would just say I think people have been trashing feminism since feminism has been around.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe it's more like having to do with like the pendulum swing, right?
Insofar as like when women make advancements, and then there's a
Yeah, with any civil rights movement or any type of fight for civil rights, you just notice a pendulum swing. There will be a reaction when people ask for their rights, and like you said, when the suffragists and the suffragettes, I'm turning into Elma Fudd too, but when they came out, there was a huge reaction. Just look up, quick Google search, flyers that were drawn, suffragists of the suffragists and the suffragettes. They were ugly women. They were annoying. They had their ankles showing, which was a big deal, and it showed women getting kicked in their breasts and their asses, just to be frank. There was a pendulum swing on that. I did my video on Sundown Towns, and part of the reason I did that was there was a huge pendulum swing after the abolishment of slavery. There was this buildup for 20 years. Like, for the first time, you had Black senators and politicians and social thinking clubs. This around the time, Ida B. Wells, Frederick Douglass, Madam C.J. Walker, right? And people got upset. And part of that had to do, with the anti-immigrant pushback. It had to do with the Indian Wars, and then the policies like going into the Philippines and Central America. So you're always going to have a pendulum swing when people make advances because of, and it has to do with, I'm sorry, I'm using those buzzwords, patriarchy and white supremacist systems. And sometimes the two of those really go hand in hand with keeping rich people rich and poor people poor. So we're experiencing that again today with the push of third wave feminism, like you said, and that has a big thing to do with the second civil rights movement, with the gay civil rights movement and gay activism. Gay marriage had a huge effect on this pushback because I see the same amount of transgender bashing and gay, complaining about them asking for their rights, and the same thing with the concept of feminism. It's just going to be a pendulum swing. And this is one of the things that you can do. Like you said, it's been done before, it's going to be done again.
In those anti-suffragette, I guess, pieces that were drawn up, a lot of times the women were portrayed as browbeating their husbands and abandoning their children to go off and do politics.
Yep.
So it's these attacks on women wanting to first leave the home, and then in the 1960s, female hippies, these slutty women who are just out having sex with people, and they just want someone to pay for their birth control and sort of.
And lesbians. That's big.
Yes.
All feminists are lesbians, which also is bashing lesbians. Because that's seen as like, oh my God, lesbian, like the amount of times that's used like as some type of insult, as if it's a bad thing to be
right.
a lesbian. Because there's contention within that too, of the idea of a woman not being attracted to a man.
Yeah.
It's seen as insult. That's why you have issues of corrective rape. Yes, it's still a thing. Oh, if you want to talk about South Africa too, with the rape of that specifically. But it still happens. In America, it happens in England, it happens in pretty much any place that you have a presence of LGBTQ people.
That kind of community will produce that sort of homophobia more actively than just a sort of latent homophobia that exists, everywhere, unless it's rooted out.
Yeah, but I think that all this has to do with, and I'm going to talk about South Park because South Park nailed this. Have you seen this season of South Park?
No, I haven't. Being in Germany, I haven't.
Oh my God. It really hit the nail on the head because they did the topic of not only the election and the absurdity of it, but the topic of nostalgia. and how important nostalgia is, especially when you're nostalgic over a time period, and a time period that wasn't that great for everybody. Maybe it was great for you, but it wasn't great for everybody else, right? And this nostalgia does have like racist time. Like one of the members, like member berries or whatever, said, remember when there wasn't as many Mexicans? Remember when marriage was between a man and woman and we didn't have to see them? Like, that's the big problem of just even being aware that there are people who are different than you and they're trying to ask for rights and trying to address that and this has to do with, like, you know, if you are white and you're cis and you're a male, this is in statistics, all right? It's not an argument about white privilege. Sociologists and psychologists have been doing this work for years, and it frustrates me that there are some people who will just dismiss the entire thing, even though they have no experience or, you know, they are not academic, but then you can fight with this whole anti-academic thing. There's so many ways that you can support staying ignorant, and bashing feminism is part of that. It's a great way to do it because you're going to be able to find other people who agree with you because of all those like nostalgic reasons and confused, deluded reasons of why you want to maintain privilege.
There's also, I think, in terms of YouTube specifically, the fact that the type of person who watches YouTube is going to skew more male than female, you know, like in the aggregate,
Yeah.
and younger. And of course, you know, with more money. So, I mean, I think it's getting more democratic, but you've got like a skew toward, like, I would say European content, of course, that we watch. And a lot of that is produced by white guys. If you look around the atheist community, yes, there are a handful of anti-feminists who aren't white, but the vast majority are white men in their probably, you know, 30s or upper 20s or teens or something. And they're talking to other guys like them about things that how they're being wronged, and that then produces, you know, these sort of cliques of fans who cross-pollinate across a lot of channels and share each other's content and are quite then they pick up on whatever is told to them to say about feminists. So whatever the current buzz phrase is or the current insult, that gets populated through the content creators to the community, and then that comes back to feminists. So I think YouTube obviously is not representative of what happens in reality when it comes to feminists and feminism.
Well, but the other thing too, I would argue, like, it is true. Well, like I said, YouTube is a different ballgame because, like you said, it's more concentrated with that population. But one of the things is happening in reality. Like, one of the things I think about is that some of these guys on here watching the YouTube channel, guess what I see them after the election? Voters. A lot of people turned out to vote for, obviously, like, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but there are people that turn out for Donald Trump, and we can't ignore that the internet has become part of our reality. We can't ignore that people are getting most of their news sources from Facebook, from Twitter. You know, they're not clicking the scientific studies on articles or trying to get the links of whatever thing they saw on BuzzFeed. You know, it really concerns me that people are like, I saw this thing on BuzzFeed, that's feminism. I saw this person on Twitter, that's feminism, that's all of feminism. I saw this thing on this internet thing. Let's get angry about this and then rinse, wash, repeat, and not offer any real solutions other than shut up. At the end of the day, all it is shut up and not looking at the second sex or not looking at actual text. Like, I don't know, that's part of the reason I like your channel, or, you know, because you actually do the research and then I can actually link to it. I don't like to have okay, let me look at this BuzzFeed article. Like, come on.
Yeah, that's not the main source, you know. That's like linking to Tumblr for, you know.
Yeah. But that's the main source of complaint, because if they had to actually look at, like I said, actually clicking flipping studies. Like, it's just amazing when people source like like studies, but they won't even look at the controls. They won't look at the science behind it, and then they claim that they're using like a scientific method behind it. It's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yeah, the buzzwords get dropped in, but they aren't always used properly.
Well, but it's clickbait and it's money. And at this point, because that's part of the thing too, why is bashing feminism the recreational thing? It ain't recreational at this point. It's money.
Yes.
It's a job. And they wouldn't be doing it unless they made money. And, you know, it's funny because then they could say, oh, you just care about the money if you have a Patreon, because as we know, Patreon just creates millionaires of YouTubers, obviously. And I don't even have a Patreon. I don't make any money from my channel, and I don't even care how many subscribers I have, because like that's the thing, they'll try to flip it and say it's recreation and it's just their opinion, but it's like, but you're making money and we know it. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to make money from YouTube, but the ideas that have been spread are having real life effects, and we saw that from this.
Yeah, I want to agree. I mean, your point about the way that it's being used, the crossover, and the impact it has in real life. Yeah, those Trump voters probably would have voted anyway, but what the content does, of course, is it creates a certain hostile narrative that isn't based in actual reasoning and evidence. It's often just based in calling people names and misrepresenting factual information. I'm thinking of, you know, Carl's video that somebody, I think it was Sean and Jen, took apart. Well, lots of people have taken his videos apart, and of course Bearing is basically just been reduced now to calling people names and feeding out, you know, drama in order to make money because his channel went down. So that, yeah, that cottage industry then ends up, even though these people say they play characters or say that they're not always giving their opinion the way that they would present it to a real person in reality because they're playing a character on YouTube, their audience, I don't think, knows that. Their audience gets riled up and then looks for someone to, you know, verbally, you know, type out insults to. So, and that of course doesn't just carry on to their online behavior, but it's how it starts to frame how they see the rest of the world. So there is an issue of, I think it was an article about radicalization of young white men. On to our next question. This one's a little bit longer, and it's from Nihilistic
Eukaryote.
Eukaryote. That sounds like a biological term.
Yeah.
This may not be limited to feminism, rather discussion in general, and the question I would like to ask is, what guidelines would you advise in formulating a good question? Being someone who is working towards dismantling my adopted views on things such as gender in favor of a more critical approach to addressing current and historical issues. I ask this because when I prodded to ask questions in discussions, I often find myself overwhelmed by waves of new information to process, and thus usually lose my footing on identifying and figuring out which parts of the discussion are worthwhile to inquire about without making the question sound too simplistic or stupid, for lack of a better word. So again, how would you advise in formulating a good question?
Oh my God, is philosophy right now? Was that a good question?
Yeah, well, we can go into nerd territory.
Oh, well, I think formulating a good question, I guess that has to, obviously it depends on the topic, but I think for me, anytime I try to ask a question, one, always ask for a source. Because what you would call it, if you don't have sources, I really don't care about what you have to say as an answer, right? That's the first thing. But I don't know, I think you just have to be honest and intellectually honest, you know, not trying to get in an argument, not trying to be trollish, and because there are some people that just get off on arguing and they have no desire to participate in a question or formulate a good question. But my big thing would be honest, and sometimes it is overwhelming getting a lot of answers back, but sometimes that's a good thing. But usually I will not even look at answers unless it's like they have a source or they have a link or something. So I guess that would be my response. But it's always dependent on the context of the situation.
Of course. Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to clarify. I'm going to give some advice that I sort of have put together from different pieces of advice from other people. I
Yeah.
am often asked to chair sessions when I go to conferences because, well, I've been at these conferences for a long time. I know people organize them and they're always desperate for somebody to chair a session. So I
No.
often volunteer. And as the chair, one of your jobs, besides keeping everyone to time and trying to pronounce everyone's name correctly, is
Mhm.
to ask a question of a presenter if nobody in the audience has asked them a question. Because
Yeah.
that's the worst thing in the world. You travel all the way to the conference, you give your presentation, and then two other people give their talks and they get all the questions and you get none. So
Yeah.
I always try to prepare a question for every single presenter in that case. But there have been times that I've been asked to chair sessions that I just know nothing
Yeah.
about. I can't ask a smart question. And in those situations, I do one of two things. I pick a point from their discussion that seemed important, and I
Yeah.
ask them to expand on it. Can you please
Yeah.
tell me more about this thing? The other thing is to ask them to clarify it. Can you tell me precisely what you mean by this thing?
Yeah.
How is it relevant to whatever else? So asking for, and this should, if you come across a word you don't know, or someone is using a term that you haven't heard before, just ask them, can you please
Yeah.
clarify what you mean by that? Like when we started about womanism, I asked you to define, what is womanism? And then you can do the other thing on to expand it. So when you say white feminism, what do you mean by that?
Hmm.
And so you can, how does white feminism play a role in modern feminist movements, for instance?
Yeah.
These
That
are
was a
easy.
good question.
So that's it's a little trick from me to you, a little gem reward for listening to the show.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, yeah. And for answers, just don't accept answers without as evidence. What was that fancy Christopher Hitchens quote or
Oh
something?
yes,
Claim
that which
without
cannot
evidence.
that which cannot be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Or that which
Yeah.
can be, yeah, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So then the second to last question is going to come from Kisumi Fowler. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. I know I've heard that before, but of course, when I'm on air now, I can't remember how to pronounce it now. Kisumi had a very long question that we don't have time to read out, but it was taking issue with the perception of feminism or some feminists within feminism who want to downplay or put less emphasis on the sexual relations and more on the interconnection between two human beings. And so
Hmm.
the question that was asked was, why is it bad? Oh, sorry. Why is it expected out of anyone the idea that they should focus on one's personality and mind first when thinking of dating someone? Why is it bad to focus on sex or sexuality first? Isn't that parroting religious dogma?
That is an interesting perspective.
Is that one that you come across a lot of feminists who say that sex shouldn't be important?
I don't know. For me, well, my friends are slutty. So no,
I
okay.
also
Well,
I don't know feminists who are,
um,
basically saying sex is less important than a personal connection in a relationship. Depends on what kind of interaction you want to have, I think.
yeah, I've seen 50. I've seen some people have an anti. Let's say, let's not talk about sex because here's a big problem in America, or just people that descend from puritanical cultures, right? Because that's an aspect of America that's a bit different from Europe, right? I'm not saying that Europe didn't have conservative values, obviously, but the Puritans took it to a different level, or much more strict level. So that is at the foundations of this country. So I think not only England, but America have this special repressive sexual attitude that's still influenced from religious dogma. So I do agree with that second point. So I think that there's just a natural um, awkwardness and discomfort with even bringing up the idea of sex or sexual preferences, right? That's why there is still a big issue with people being closeted if you're LGBTQ. The amount of sexual repression and hiding and being shamed for it, right? And this is a huge, what you see it very clearly um, was sometimes how, let's look at like sex scandals in government, right? And I'm not addressing things where people have done an illegal act, right? Like if they're, like Anthony Weiner pursuing a 16-year-old girl, which is disgusting. But I'm talking even consensual relationships are seen as a scandal, a horrible scandal. People step down from office over sex scandals. People do not step down from office if an unarmed Black person is killed wrongfully. They do not step down from office if there's lead poisoning in the water. Sex is very uncomfortable and shameful, right? And that's why there's an obsession over it, but it's like in hiding, right? That's why the porn industry, online porn industry, oh my God, the online porn industry is just so happy with sexual repression because everybody decides to hide it. So I think this affects some feminists too. But I think that's much more of just like a natural attitude of like focus on the personality and like sex second, right? I think that is a ubiquitous problem and not just a feminist problem.
If you look back to the sexual revolution in the 1960s, that was very much driven by women's desire to have access to birth control, and convenient, reliable birth control transformed women's sex lives, because it was the case, and still is in many places in the world today, that women were slaves to their bodies. Whenever they got pregnant, their whole lives were interrupted or are interrupted. And then that just stops their education, stops their career progression. It creates more strains on the family if there isn't an opportunity for family planning. I'm thinking of the Philippines in this case, where women are quite desperate, where they were denied birth control even. And so the impact of that on our lives and the sexual revolution, the way that society and religion kept us from kept us from having kids out of wedlock was to put all this pressure on people to not have sex. And they did that by saying, there's obviously, in some cases, you're going to marry someone, there are things more important than sex, because you're going to live with them, and as much as you enjoy having sex with them, you have to do something else, but besides this, you can't do that all the time, right? So you need a little bit more in common than a good sexual relationship. But of course, in religion and in conservative society, that also was the only way to have a relationship, was that marital relationship. And the sexual revolution and the gay rights movement, and also I noticed from reading the National Organization of Women's websites timeline on their history, they were speaking out in favor of lesbian rights in the 1970s, and I'd never known that. I was always associating the gay rights movement with men. So it's another area where advocacy for women in order to make advancement. So I'm kind of getting off track now and trying to remember where I was going back to. But yes, it was the sexual liberation movement that began to give men and women more options than just a married life. And I associate feminism a lot more with sexual freedom and sexual choice and sexual autonomy than trying to tell people they shouldn't have sexual urges. That to me is like the antithesis of feminism, which is about accurate medical education and empowering women to make choices about when and how many kids they want to have, if they want to have kids. And all the freedoms that the ability to control your reproductive cycles and activities gives you as a woman. It's a necessary component to our freedom.
And it has to do with personal autonomy. One of the things that I actually found interesting, have you ever seen Ken Burns' Prohibition?
No, I saw his baseball one, but that was the only one I've watched start to finish. But no, I didn't know about the Prohibition one.
We'll also watch Jazz, but the Prohibition one, what they notice is a kind of tiny but very important sexual revolution in the 20s and 30s, because what you had happening, during the Jazz age, right? And the car is now a major aspect. So it's a moving room. And you had, for the first time, young couples being able to go away in a moving room. And guess what? And this is a very important thing, because this is around the time, Margaret Sanger was racist, and there were racist intentions behind the birth control movement, but there was a birth control movement, and for the first time, women getting access to pamphlets on how for family planning or prevention of pregnancy and treatment of venereal disease. This is another important aspect too. And you have the fashion changing, right? Women are cutting off their hair and having the bob for the first time. And ankles are showing. This is a big deal, man. Ankles are showing. But you have had this sexual revolution, women going out into bars, like men saw the saloon as theirs, right? And sometimes men were getting pissed off that these flappers, these women, are treating it like they can go out themselves. But then it was like also men for the first time seeing that women are starting to like go out and wanting personal autonomy. I can cut my hair. I can wear this. I can, do those. And that was like the groundwork. You had the birth control movement and stuff. So like you said, there is a core aspect of feminism pushing for sexual, not only, autonomy, but pride of being comfortable and happy. And yes, I am. So, and then they did the pendulum swing back again, and then trying to get women like during the 50s just to cook clean. And then you had another pendulum swing back during the 60s and that time period that you were saying. So yeah, I just wonder what point we are at the pendulum swing now of somebody seeing like, or because this is the first time I've heard about like feminists being, oh, it's not important how the sex is. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that was a new one to me too. I mean, it might be, again, based on the kind of relationship you're looking for, which is you're looking for a long-term committed relationship, but I can't think of any named names that pop to mind for me. And also just to echo your point on Margaret Sanger, she was a pioneer in women's reproductive health. She held racist views. So did George Washington, so did Thomas Jefferson. A lot of our historical figures held odious views, did odious things.
Oh, yeah.
And that's part of who they are. It's part of who we were as a country at the time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's a tapestry. I think one of the things is like, and I've made this point specifically, that I never will discredit the good things that somebody did, but I will not just ignore the bad things, right? People are, and this is something that's so important, that makes me always look at my attitudes too, because you have seen a lot of amazing, smart people do horrible, sometimes just straight up stupid things. Like my favorite example is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He believed in fairies, like straight up. And he believed those two girls were like, fairies are real, Now, granted, that's a smaller example. But like I said, the important part of Margaret Sanger is because of now what Planned Parenthood is, right? Or now what reproductive rights and those things are doing. But we also need to remember that it's complicated, right? That Facebook status, it's complicated. But yeah, I think the big thing too, to get back on the point of, for the first time having personal autonomy, sometimes I think, and I wonder if you notice this, even people who are atheists having very puritanical views still on sexual autonomy, or what the idea of, like, a woman who's a slut, right? It's really weird to see people accuse feminists of not liking sex or not doing that, but then accusing them of, you just want to have sex and you just want to be like, this or that. It's this weird dichotomy, and I want to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, the whole Madonna whore, double bind, that if you don't have sex, you're a prude, and if you have sex, then you're a slut. So there's no right amount of sex for a woman. And
you can never win.
No, and it's a tactic that people will use. It actually was a BuzzFeed video, but it was about what men meant when they catcalled women. And one of them was, you seem confident and making a good point, or whatever. I'm going to focus on your sexuality to distract from all that.
Yeah. No, yeah. And there was a very interesting, one of my friends put up a screenshot of, somebody DM'd her of like, oh, you have really beautiful eyes. And then she's like, oh, thank you. I think my eyes are beautiful too. And the guy freaked out. I'm like, what? What do you think you have to know about that? That is cocky. You are arrogant. Like, and it was like, wait, what? Yes. I'm literally agreeing with you. Yes. I'm literally agreeing with you. But the problem is the confidence. The problem is I know my value. I know my worth. And that is a scary concept because that goes against, but I expect this from you. I expect that from you. And and then sex is a big thing to deal with. Like, I expect sex from you, but I also expect you to be pure in my eyes. And there's no way that you can hold those two views and ever respect someone.
I was thinking about that comment about asking women to smile. And it's tied into that, giving someone a compliment, giving a stranger a compliment. And you know, it's possible. I give people, actually, I'm like a rather gregarious person. If I see something cool, someone's wearing something cool, their hair looks cool, I will tell them. And it'll be like, you're striking. That is such a great look that you've got going on today.
Oh, yeah.
But what I won't do is say something like, ooh, that's a really nice tight shirt you're wearing, or something like that. You know, I'm not giving them a compliment because I'm looking for something from them. I want to give a gift to them. It's completely selfless. It's not about me, it's about them. And I think guys who give you a compliment, or anyone who gives you a compliment, with the agenda of having you then feel grateful and tell them how grateful you are to them, that's an agenda. Or telling a woman you don't know who's going about her day to smile so that a woman smiles at you and you feel better about yourself. That, again, is not about her. If you give a person a compliment and they do nothing, you shouldn't feel offended, because it wasn't anything you should have been expecting anything from anyway.
Well, but that's like, I wonder if at the core of it, it's not even about a compliment. It's about, I want you to look at me. It's not, because they know that a real conversation is not going to come from like, hey, baby, oh my God. Like, you know what I'm saying? They know nothing's going to come from it. But what it is acknowledgement. And that, like you said, deserving of, like, they just want to see a pretty girl smile at them. And sometimes it gets worse. Like, I've been followed when either I ignored something or I still told somebody fuck off, like, you know, been told like really gross crap.